All right, we're back with another topic in the now properly named Harmonic-Jams podcast. We just had a little bit of a placeholder title before. Tackling the topic today of violence in video games and everything that kind of falls under that umbrella. Joined by Sate, as usual, here, and another new guest
Hello.
of Johto Jonny.
Hello.
So, how this topic ended up coming about is it was a topic that I was thinking on after one of my university classes, where the professor started the class with just one slide of a PowerPoint presentation that said, which video game is more violent, Battlefield or Kirby? And it was a serious debate that we were meant to ponder for basically the entire rest of the class and then come to a general consensus at the end. And that made me really think, like, there really are, like, lots of different ways that violence can be depicted and lots of different versions of violence here that come in all sorts of different forms, and I figured that would be an interesting topic to tackle. So the main reason why that's a debate in the first place is because there are games with cartoon violence like Kirby in that what you're actually doing can be considered violent when you really think about it. Like inhaling your foes, eating them, stealing their powers, destroying planets. But it's cartoon violence that has, there's more cutesy aesthetic to it where we don't really imagine the more violent, like visually violent aspects of it like we would see visually in a game like Battlefield with blood and gore violence. So that kind of creates the debate about which is actually more violent and is there a difference in how violence is depicted and how we regard this. And I wanted to ask you guys on your thoughts first. If you just had to point blank answer which is more violent, Kirby or Battlefield, which would you say and why?
I would have said Battlefield off the top of my head, but when you think about it, destroying worlds and like killing gods, basically genocide, it kind of is more violent, I guess. But what do you think, Johnny?
I don't care how you cut it. I think Battlefield is more violent and more problematically violent. If that is my differentiator. That is my differentiator.
That it's problematic. More problematic.
It's right, exactly. So whether or not you're going to say one is more violent than the other, I would say that one is a problematic kind of violence and the other one is a non-problematic kind of violence.
That's something that we can delve into as well, is what exactly can make violence problematic or not, and some different views on that. My personal view between those is that Kirby's more violent in terms of what you do. Like, Battlefield might be more violent in terms of blood and gore, but just face value, if I were just to, like, if I could only answer with, like, one word, one or the other, I would personally say Kirby. Taking into consideration what
Interesting.
but it's not what most people are going to look at and think of to be, like, a violent video game. But, it is pretty brutal when you think about it. And I had a whole lot of fun as a kiddo inhaling enemies. Kirby's
so that
great.
got me thinking, the fact that's even a debate got me thinking, like, okay, what really is violence? Because you would think blood and gore, that's obviously more violent, but that might not be the actual definition, though. So I looked it up on, what is this, Merriam-Webster? The use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. I mean...
That's the definition of violence, you're saying?
That's the definition of violence, yes. It doesn't really say anything about blood and guts.
Okay, so I think there are different ways to depict violence, obviously. And sure, violence as a definition is exactly what you just said, but the way that different kinds of violence impact the human brain varies quite substantially. I do think that we should take the time first before we dive into that, because that's some loaded conversation. Maybe talk about like what counts as violence beyond just the definition. Like, what do you think is violence? Let's say that you're playing Kirby. What's violent in there? What are you doing that you consider violent?
I mean, you can attack people. You can have like a sword and slash them, but like when you slash them with the sword in Kirby, they don't like split in two. So I would say that's less violent than something like Battlefield. Because in Battlefield, it's more like realistic, more of a realistic kind of violence. So it's more damage being done. So that kind of
like
ties
the
into
closer it
definition.
hits to home.
Yeah.
What
Because
about?
I mean, if I slash you with a sword and you just act as if you got punched or pushed back, that's not as bad as if I slash you and you're split open. Like, that's more damage.
Right, exactly. And when you compare the same action in Kirby to the same action in Battlefield. Like Kirby can get, projectile weapons that essentially work like guns, right? You hit the enemy and they pop open and explode. And if you do the same thing in Battlefield, first of all, you're dealing with humans, so it kind of puts us in a real world situation in that sense, and it makes it easier for us to vividly imagine ourselves in that position. And when you shoot someone in that, it's just like it would happen in real life. The person like kind of starts ragdolling, or depending on how accurate the game depicts what happens when a gun hits someone, body parts explode while the rest of the body's intact, or maybe the whole body turns to sludge, things like that. Like it gets really gruesome. And I think that Kirby is not necessarily doing more violent actions than or they're not necessarily not doing more violent actions than the characters in Battlefield, but the actions and their repercussions are completely different. Okay, what's your question? Sorry.
My question is, so if someone throws a grenade into like a group of people, just for example's sake, say 5 people, and it explodes, that's violent. But if they launched a nuke into millions of people, would you consider that more violent?
I would not consider it. I don't know if violence is the word to differentiate the two there, because obviously a nuclear explosion is much more of a mercy in terms of what the receiving party experiences. The grenade is more violent in the sense that for someone to do that, watch it happen and be okay with it, I feel like has to have more of a devious intent to it. And the person has to be more desensitized to that sort of thing.
Yeah, 'cause it's not like you're just clicking a button.
Right. Whereas like you mentioned, a nuclear explosion, it's easy to desensitize yourself to what exactly it does, because it makes people evaporate, kind of like something in Kirby, how when you hit someone and they explode in a non-gory manner,
Yeah, I would kind of like to throw my hat into the ring with the question as well, and kind of say that like the nuke is kind of the equivalent of Kirby, whereas the grenade is kind of the equivalent of Battlefield, especially in like a depiction in media, for example, in terms of like what the player is seeing and experiencing. My God, and
Let's make a new word.
yeah, experiencing. When you see and experience, because seeing isn't experiencing by default. Like, if you're playing some sort of a shooter game where, or maybe it doesn't even have to be you, maybe it can be like a character in a cutscene that throws a grenade into a crowd, and you like directly watch the effects and take that in the cutscene, where it's like, oh geez, like that just happened as we watch like the actual visible effect on the people. But if we're playing something like, say, Metal Gear Solid 3, where right towards the beginning of that game, one of the bad guys fires a nuke at this one area, and one guy's like, no, don't stop, you're attacking our fellow Russians. He's like, no, I'm gonna do it anyway, and he shoots it and apparently kills a lot of people, but you don't see any of that. You just see like the explosion in the mushroom cloud, and then you just have to believe that there was a lot of people killed. That really plays into the bad guy being a bad guy, and also like serves other plot purposes, but isn't really a blood and gore kind of violence.
So I think that the loss of life is, not acceptable no matter which form it takes place in, if that makes sense. At least needless loss of life, right? So that you bring up an interesting point in the sense that like, with nuclear explosions being easier to, I guess, for us to digest as an action compared to blowing someone's limbs off in visually. But no matter how you cut it, there is a loss of life, and that goes for Kirby too. And personally, I mean, maybe other people don't feel this way, but I know I do. I always found it kind of weird. I didn't want to kill the cute creatures that Kirby goes up against, because I always did process it as a loss of life that didn't need to be lost. Like, they're kind of not attacking you; they kind of just walk their way. And if they touch you, sure, you get hurt. But I mean, hey, that's your own damn fault if you walked into them. It's like if I'm walking down the street here in New York City, and I walk into someone and I kind of topple over. Like, does that mean I should kill them? No. I don't think so.
I mean, that whole tangent is kind of where I was going with the nuke argument, the nuke question, because it's depiction of violence versus the actual amount of damage being done. So, like with the grenade, you see the effects of it, but with the nuke, it just explodes into a cloud of white and you don't see it. But there's a hell of a lot more damage being done there. So is that
Yeah.
not more violent?
Yeah, there's
Like
more loss of life.
just because we don't see it and feel it personally, that doesn't really make it less violent, does it?
Let me bring back up the definition of violence while Harmonia say what you say.
I just wanted to make sure that we're still talking about like within the context of like a video game. Like I know that you mentioned before that like seeing loss of life is problematic, but you know, evidently like for sure in real life and all that, but within the context of a video game, like do you think that's still problematic, or depending on the context, like back with the Metal Gear Solid 3 example there, where it's like it's used as like a story tool, like a plot device to make this guy clearly be a bad guy and serve like, you know, for other purposes in the plot as well.
Yeah, I mean, for all you know, nobody was even over there where he shot that nuke, because you don't see anyone.
Well, I mean, more so
But the
even assuming that there
implication-
were people over there.
Yeah, they
But it's
say
not
in the
like-
game, right? that
Yeah,
there
but it's
are.
not even, you know, like the player doing it or anything. It's just like a plot device of like, this bad guy did this bad thing. You as the player need to stop him so he doesn't get to do bad things anymore, you know?
Right. So the definition is kind of loaded. I'm looking at it and it has 3 different verbs, which are hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. And it really depends on which one of those words you focus on, honestly. That would probably bring you to your answer when it comes to at least something like asking what's worse, Kirby or Battlefield.
Yeah.
When it comes to violence, like if you're talking about hurting,
I suppose I was
Someone-
focusing more on damage.
And maybe not
that
what's
example.
worse, per se. Like, maybe that's not the best question to be asking of which is worse, but necessarily, but more so, like, which one is more violent. Like, whether,
Right.
how much problematic it is, and, like, how bad that is, 'cause, like, a whole nother debate as well. Like, is there, you know, problems in eating these cute, fluffy creatures and stealing their abilities for your own and destroying their home, you know?
yeah. I mean, okay, so I think we should probably start establishing what's socially acceptable when it comes to violence in video games, because we keep going back to that, and we seem to have all sorts of answers. But you know, if you think about it again, you have these games that are rated E for everyone, like Kirby and Pokemon and whatever else, right? Where there's what they call cartoon violence or comic mischief, right?
Oh, yeah, that one.
And so that is, you know, they put that in there in the rating to acknowledge that there is violence of sort. They even use the word violence, you know, like cartoon violence, comic mischief, right? But it's E for everyone. Like everyone of every age is allowed to play it. It's not M for mature. And why do you think that is? Why do you think something like Kirby, Pokemon, Legend of Zelda are more socially acceptable?
Well, I think a large part of it is we're just kind of brought up believing that. We just kind of buy into it over time.
You think society's kind of just made us get so used to a certain way of thinking?
Yeah, because I mean, we're all brought up with the idea that cartoon violence isn't as bad. And so obviously we're going to bring our kids up the same way, thinking the same thing. And it's just kind of a cycle. I think that's part of it, at least, for sure.
I have an answer for it. I would say, like, how close it hits to home in terms of, like, how applicable is it to the real world? Like, is it depicting something that could realistically be going on here? One example that I find really interesting is the 1976 arcade cabinet game Death Race, which was basically the first big mainstream instance of media taking issue with like the violence in a video game and saying like, oh, we gotta keep these video games away from people, it's gonna teach like these awful things. So Death Race, I've never seen the film, but apparently it was a film where there was this race like across the country where you were rewarded for hitting pedestrians and like getting points by doing that and stuff like that,
my
by
God.
taking lives. Yeah. And
I shouldn't be laughing. I'm horrible for this.
and apparently it's supposed to like be a criticism against like, you know, the dangers of like authoritarian dictatorships and stuff like that that might put something like that into place. And there was all these criticisms that were like, oh no, it's supposed to be like satirizing that, but it like revels in its violence too much, and it's actually this really awful thing. I've never seen it. Like maybe I'll see it one day and I'll be able to like use it as an example better. But the success of this film and the controversy of this film got these game designers to say like, hey, maybe we should make a game that capitalizes off of that movie's success. And that was a time where you could just take the name of, you know, an IP like that and make a game similar to it, and apparently not have to worry about getting sued.
Because it was the 70s, yeah.
Yeah.
The Copyright Act didn't come around until the 70s.
So they had, you know, no association with the film, but they decide to make an arcade cabinet game called Death Race, where you control a car, and, you know, the car is just, you know, a very simple sprite that's like, you know, a T and another T upside down, if you know what I mean. They're just that shape there moving around the screen. And you have
really
to
retro.
And you have to run over these humanoid figures. But they wanted to differentiate it from the film, say that it's not like people running over people. So on the arcade cabinet, they have like these Grim Reaper looking skeleton doodles with scythes that it shows driving the cars. And like in the manual, and what the game developers claim is that these humanoid figures running around, they're gremlins or goblins or something like that, essentially. And, you know, they run away from you and you have to run them over them in this square space, and they become tombstones that then, you know, makes it more difficult to hit the others because now you have these obstacles of the tombstones. But people were taking issue with this because they were like, oh my goodness, it's teaching people to run over other people, like to run over pedestrians in the street. And the game developers are like, no, it's not people, it's gremlins. It's completely different. Don't worry.
That's kind of getting to the heart of what I asked that question for, because they just insist that it's goblins. That's kind of the same way that like cartoon violence, like they insist that it's not that bad because it's a cartoon, so who cares? But the thing I was trying to figure out, the thing I was trying to get to the heart of is it worse because it seems realistic automatically?
I think that is a good. Well, where we're talking about now is like if it's what is socially acceptable, and I think that is the differentiator. I think Harmonia brings up a good divider, a good dividing line there is
how close it can be related to the real world.
Yeah, how close it's related to the real world, how realistic that violence is depicted. Because like, think about, let's take The Legend of Zelda. It's a little more mature than Kirby, right? And Link holds a sword the entire time, and when you fight the enemies, you're slicing them with the sword, but the enemies aren't like getting cut in half. They're kind of like taking, as if you're hitting them with a stick, right? It's like as if you're hitting them with a stick. And even to this day,
it's like a comic book kind of effect, like the smack kind of visual effect.
Right. So you can think about it how like the receiving end is affected by the violence. I think that goes a long way. And think about how many characters like they'll fall from a large, from a long way up, and they land and they're fine, right? Because they can handle the landing, even though in real life someone won't be able to fall from that high. Yeah. Or and that happens in Zelda too, right? You just take some damage. You know, he doesn't get he doesn't turn to mist.
He doesn't splat.
Exactly. And I think
even if you fall from a tall height and die,
that's good.
His momentum will just stop. Like he'll be standing when he lands, but then he'll just like fall over in the death animation. Just like,
or in Breath of the Wild, you just like pause the game while you're falling and warp somewhere else.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
Or you could faceplant.
Okay, that's a good point. The way they get affected isn't really the same.
Exactly. And I think that's where the comic mischief word comes into play, and then cartoon violence. You know, that's why they really push those wordings, because not only do they give us the visualization, but they also just sound better. You know, they sound easy to digest, no matter what age you are, even to just read that as a quote unquote warning. Exactly, it sounds more acceptable, and then when you play it in the game, they present it in a way that's more acceptable by the criteria we just mentioned.
Yeah, like if you're playing something like Pokemon, it's a similar thing where it's just like, you know, smacking, and you know, there's no blood and gore or anything like that. Like, it's not that weird Pokemon game that PETA made that one time. Like, it doesn't revel in the violence. Yeah, remember that?
That shit was so weird. Bro, yeah, PETA does more work to make people hate vegetarians than anything else.
Which is too bad. I'm vegetarian. No one hates me, though.
Yet.
Well,
Well,
yet. Yeah.
everyone in the comments comes in like, man, that Johto Jonny guy though, I hate him.
Yeah, time to change it.
So when it comes to, you know, talking about what's socially acceptable, I think we should also talk about the opposite end of like what goes too far, because there are games that depict things realistically, right? But they're still up on the market. And I feel like if something were to go too far, it probably wouldn't even be out on the market to be bought. And like for me personally, I think of like, let's think of Grand Theft Auto. It's what you picture when you kind of picture the antithesis to what we've been talking about so far, right? When you talk about Kirby.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you think maybe by comparison, it seems like it's too far.
Well, in terms of being socially acceptable, I mean, a lot of people consider that too far.
Well, for kids.
Yeah.
But it's socially acceptable for adults. But think
Unless
about
there are news
also,
outlets that want to say that it's causing people to
Yeah, that's
in
what I was
real
thinking
life when
of.
it's not. But
well, they say that by trying to say like kids are playing those games, right? As if the ESRB rating doesn't exist or something.
I mean, I'm sure there are some, but you know, it's not, you know,
right.
practice.
But
you know how many 10-year-olds are in a COD lobby? You know?
But like, why is something like Grand Theft Auto still acceptable to even adults? And I want to like start by like giving us one thought of mine as to why, and then I want to hear your thoughts. But I think it's because like think about when you blow someone up in Grand Theft Auto, as an example. You know, their body parts don't go flying everywhere. Their body, like if you bring out a bazooka, they just kind of ragdoll. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, something that would be too far. Think about like what is not allowed even on the internet, you know, which is sites depicting like really heavy gore, really heavy violence of things that like are not even allowed to be shown on the news networks. And that's, you know, that is the, you know, things like body parts flying around and what happens to someone when they get shot by a rifle. Or
the kind of stuff that audiences don't really want to see.
Kombat.
Yeah, because it could scar them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And make them feel like,
what do you
wow,
guys
I
think?
really don't want to do that again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the only Grand Theft Auto game that I've played before is 5, when that released on whatever release it was on at that point. And, you know, that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, I can, you know, get behind this and have some fun and stuff like that because it did tone things down. I feel like if I was actually seeing, you know, shoot someone through the head and like brains come out or something like that, I would be like, oh, I don't know if I want to play this video game anymore. Or, you know, playing something like GTA Online with friends and, you know, put a sticky bomb on their car and blow them up and see them go flying. It's like, you know, that's pretty funny.
Yeah,
but,
it's like
you know,
funny.
Yeah.
It's almost cartoon violence.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah,
like,
in a way
it's
it
abstracted
is.
down in a way. But, you know, if it was trying to be as realistic as it possibly could there, I would, you know, feel very turned off by that game, like, because it would be very jarring. Be like, oh, yeah, I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore, even if it is completely fake.
Yeah, and something you mentioned earlier that I kind of think is relevant here too is like how that one game changed the insinuation of what you're doing as like Reapers hitting zombies or something.
Yeah.
Like think about like Resident Evil 4, for example. It was pretty old and you're like, but you do see body parts go flying, but the reason it's okay is because they're zombies and not like living people. Even if that living person was supposed to be a bad guy, like that's still not acceptable even for a video game to put out, and that's why you don't see it happening, is because it would be harder to stomach and that person would, you know, be having a reaction, yada yada.
Well, like the zombies, you shoot them and they don't even care, they just keep coming.
Yep. And not only that, but like they get dehumanized because they're zombies, so it's not like you're watching a human get blown apart, like have its head explode. You're watching some creature that's inhuman have that happen to them.
I do think Resident Evil 4 is a good example of a game that really straddles that line, because they're like barely zombies in that game. Like they have tools, they talk to each other, they plan, they do things, they like farm. They're like almost people, but just zombie enough that you can look past all of it. You
know what's funny is I'm thinking of the most gory, violent thing I've seen in a video game that happens to a human. And funny enough, it's not something that's rated M. I don't think. I think it's rated T for teen, but it's like Tomb Raider, the reboot.
Oh.
Like if you get killed in that game, if you let Lara die, she dies in some really gruesome ways, and they show it. And I think that the reason that's acceptable is because when you die, you just start over from where you started.
Well,
so she's the only one they can do that with. They can't do it with any of the other characters.
Well, I think the other thing is you're not the one making that violence happen. I think that's another separator.
True, you're right. It's kind of a natural thing that happens to her if she like messes up, avoiding an obstacle or something, right?
I think that's another thing that defines where the line is and what's too far. Because in a movie, like, I don't know, what's a movie that's kind of like GTA? Just like any drug movie, they have violence like that all over the place, and it's fine. But if you put that stuff in GTA, it's seen as completely different because the player is the one doing it. Like, you're the one actually causing the violence yourself. It's not just happening and you're passively observing it.
Yeah, and an argument can be made for it's only as violent as the player makes it to be.
Yes, and I think the reason that violence in video games is such a heated topic among especially conservatives, obviously, is because it's about like what you as the player are doing, and they don't want humans doing those things in real life, right?
Yeah, they're afraid of mimicry. Like,
exactly.
Like that was the case in Death Races. There was these news outlets that started saying like, oh, this is gonna like get people to, run over people in the streets. That's what it's teaching here. And I swear this was a clip that was shown in one of my game design classes. I tried to find it, but I can't for the life of me find it. But I swear this was a clip that I saw where they were like interviewing people, saying like, asking if this I can't words, asking people if this was gonna like make them want to run over people. And they asked this one kid, and this one kid was like, I can't even drive.
That's the thing is like they act as if people watching that they like have to do what they see in the game now.
Yeah.
Like no.
But a lot of that is also like scapegoat to avoid the real
definitely
problems,
definitely it's the whole it's mental health, not actual weapons of destruction.
Yeah,
and
because the weapons of mass destruction make a whole lot of money.
Exactly, and it's funny too because when you think about someone playing these sort of games that you can do these acts in, I almost feel like it's more helpful than not, because it gives an outlet for some people that would just want to do something mischievous,
Something mischievous.
And like I said, the games don't go too far because they can't. Like when you do that in Grand Theft Auto, you're not seeing like super violent graphic things happening when you do it. You just kind of do it and the action is done. And I think that makes it okay for as a release for the player who is like, I'm angry. I don't think this is necessarily the healthiest way to deal with your anger, but it is therapy. A valid way for some people, and I can understand that.
Well, I was looking into that exact thing, and some people were saying that they enjoy violence in video games because they hate violence in real life. In video games, you can explore that feeling without anyone actually getting hurt.
Yes, exactly. Real people aren't getting hurt. So, like, let's say you're someone who is really mad at Tom, and you're like, fuck Tom, I want to kill Tom, and you go into. I mean, you have the option to obviously in the real world hurt Tom, but that's obviously not the good. That's not the good option. It's not even legal, so please don't do it.
Well, unless you hurt Tom emotionally.
But it's not going to make you feel better. It's really not going to make you feel better if you do it in real life, because I think that humans in general don't actually get satisfaction out of hurting people deep down when it comes down to it. And they think they will, but then they do it and it's not that way. And I think that's why you see so many murder-suicides, but that's besides the point. What I am saying is, like, your other option is to go into Grand Theft Auto and be like, you know what, that person right there is Tom. Bazooka, boom. Okay, like, that was not real Tom, but like, my bloodlust is gone because I did it to fictional Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever had feelings.
Not an ideal way to do it, but yeah.
Like
is better.
Like, might be the case for some people. I don't know if I've ever had feelings like that where I have frustration against someone in real life, so I'm gonna abstract them into the video game. Like, I'm sure it is the case for some people, but I've personally never had that kind of, feeling or will to project somebody into a video game.
Sure, but it's an alternative, and it's a way better alternative than doing it in real life.
Mhm.
For people who do think that way.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. So it doesn't seem like you guys agree, but that's why we're here.
No, I do agree. I just don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I guess this is a good time.
So how was your day time?
Well,
also, but this would be a good segue actually to how we're desensitized to certain things. But say what you want to say first, and then we'll go into that.
Oh, I was gonna say, this is kind of backtracking to one of the things that was mentioned before, that last, thought line there, where we were talking about how, a lot of these games will abstract things down, not show things as realistically as they can. But there are definitely some games out there that do revel in, how graphic they make things. Like, take Mortal Kombat, for example, that, was making headlines for how much it tried to embrace that.
Yeah, so again, that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, is like when you kill someone in Mortal Kombat, that character just kind of comes back after. It's like a game over in the sense. And
so still no consequences, really.
Yes, that character is still kind of immortalized in the sense that you can just go into another match right away and pick that character again, as if they never died. And it's kind of like what I mentioned with Lara Croft, she will die, but you just respawn, and so it's okay. And that's the only character they can do that with. If they did that with an NPC, it probably would not have been so acceptable, because that would be a permanent part of the story, and people wouldn't be okay with that. But when it's something that respawns, particularly in Mortal Kombat as a multiplayer game, you are 2 different people playing, so in a way it kind of is one person's fault when they lose, It's a fighting game.
Although it's gonna happen to someone inevitably.
Yes, but then they just respawn and try again. So I think that's still the differentiator. And this, like I said, this is a great segue into how we have been desensitized to so many things. And a lot of it is because of video games. And this kind of is a counterpoint to what I was saying before about having an alternative to hurting someone in real life. I do think it is possible. I think it'll be rarer, but you will find examples of people who will play a video game and become desensitized to certain actions, and they might then want to do it in real life as a way to further explore that sensation.
There have been some cases, but it's very rare from what I've heard.
I don't think that's even a video games thing. That's just, you do that with anything. Books, movies. I think it happens about as much.
All right, so it's not a video game specific thing, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that. That. And you're right, it happens in movies and books and stuff too.
And I know that in a lot of video games, there's a sense of empowerment when we're playing these super powerful characters doing these things that we might not be able to do in real life, but we kind of wish that we could do in real life. If I'm playing something like Assassin's Creed and jumping around from roof to roof, I remember a couple of years ago, I was working on my roof and I saw the neighboring roof and I was like, wow, I'm not going to go for that jump, but it is tempting,
Be an assassin in your life. Join the Brotherhood.
So, okay, something, and this is kind of another segue, because I feel like we really just solved that entire plot point real fast.
Well,
but I really like when video games acknowledge the violence and bring it into the story and the gameplay in a way that actually impacts the way that you progress through the game. For me, the first game that comes into mind are 2 games, Nier Automata and Undertale.
Oh wow!
And I see you have the same thought. Whoever is
that was me
typing it on our notepad that we have in the back here.
Yeah, that's actually funny.
They're a great way to start this part of the conversation, because if you look at Undertale, okay, let's look at Nier Automata first, because Undertale I think takes it a little further. But Nier Automata, when you're playing the first portion of the game, a lot of people don't realize this, but the enemies are not attacking you when you're in the overworld. So you're kind of going through the overworld, right? And because you're playing a video game, like, of course your response is, let me just beat up whatever I see and learn this combat system and just like kill the things, right? And a lot of people won't realize that those enemies are not attacking you. And it's not till you get later into the game that the game reveals, like, yeah, the enemies are actually docile and they're not attacking anyone. So it kind of makes you feel bad for doing that. And then obviously there are
you're
further
just following
story
standard practice
implications.
of what other games have taught you.
Exactly, but the game acknowledges that, and as you get further into the game, they do actually bring that into the story as a plot point. But at first, what they do is just try to make the player feel bad if they did do that in the first place, and I love that. And then you look at, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, before going into near automata here, or automata. I always say automata. I know you say automata. I know there's different ways to say it, but whatever here. To talk about Undertale, I feel like it's also a good example of, on the last point that we were talking about, desensitization, whatever, you know what I want to say.
We know what you want.
Speak today.
Where I would say that's a case where it's like we're not fully desensitized to it. There are still moments in a game that make you go like, whoa, like, should I have really done that? I feel like good examples of that are Undertale, Generation 1 Pokemon, and Persona 5 that I want to briefly talk about here. In Undertale, that moment is fighting Toriel, where it's like, if you keep on fighting like the normal RPG manner, and, you know, get her HP to 0, all of a sudden there's like this big slash that goes across her as she's, you know, slowly dying there. And it's like, oh, whoa, you know, like there are consequences to my actions here. Like, is it really okay what I've been doing? In Generation 1 Pokemon, you know, Pokemon's always just like, yeah, Pokemon battles, that's completely fine. Like, the Pokemon are having fun with it, and they have bonds with their trainers, and it's a great fun time. And Generation 1 Pokemon implies that you might have inadvertently killed Gary's Raticate as he's, you know, grieving in the Pokemon Tower there. And it's like, oh, yikes, is what I'm doing. Okay.
There's also a whole Pokemon war that apparently happened that Lieutenant Surge was in.
Yeah, that too.
So, I mean, I guess it's not all fun and games after all. I don't know.
There was that. I mean, but with these things, I mean, like, more so in terms of like the consequences of what the player is doing and the violence that they're enacting. And like the final example that I wanted to mention here was Persona 5, where it's like you're in the palaces and it's just like, they're shadows, they're cognitions, they're not real. Anything you do here, it doesn't matter. And, you know, you fight these shadows and, you know, sometimes you'll knock them down and they'll literally come up to you begging for their lives. And it's like, oh, what? You know, and
yeah,
there's
and
this
they have
much
personalities.
Yeah, and
like
there's this much more
sentient.
humanized aspect of this thing that the game explicitly told us not to humanize, and then it goes humanizing them in aspects like this. And, you know, the most efficient way to farm money in that game is to say, like, you want to live, pay up over and over and over again until they attack you, and then you knock them down, and then you tell them to pay up their pension over and over and over again. And when I was first doing that, it's like, wow, this feels wrong.
Yeah, you're like extorting them.
Yeah.
But I feel like those examples, aside from Undertale, are actually, Persona and Pokemon are a little different from Undertale because they don't really punish you for that. There are no like consequences.
They don't punish you, but they punish you in the feels by making you feel like you did something wrong. And it's like, oh, am I really in the right for continuing to do what I'm doing? Is it really okay? So I feel like
they don't explicitly punish you for that. You have to think about it yourself, though.
Yeah.
Whereas
you have to be a good person to get punished in the feels.
Exactly, and you have to actively be thinking about it, which most people, I'm sorry, they won't.
Yeah.
And
like that whole Raticate, or what was it, Rattata? That's like almost a theory.
Yeah.
Well, it's
but even if it wasn't a theory, like, you just don't think about it. Like, even looking at Persona, you don't think about it unless you actively think about it yourself, because the game never tells you, like, oh, maybe it's bad that I've been treating these shadows this way.
Yeah,
it never says that.
Maybe that's a regard where we could say that, like, cartoon violence can be more acceptable for, like, younger audiences and stuff like that, because there have been games that I played as a kid where I never saw, like, any problems with, but then playing them later, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, like, take Sly 2, for example. The whole plot of that game, the main MacGuffin that we're trying to collect, is the body parts of our deceased foe from the last game, is that we can prevent him from resurrecting as we collect parts like his still beating heart. And
that's like, Castlevania 2.
You know, or that, yeah. Where, you know, as a kid, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's the objective. But then as an adult, I'm like, whoa, this is pretty heavy. You know?
Yeah, and okay, I think Undertale is like such a great example of this because unlike what we just mentioned with Pokemon and Persona, Undertale like the whole game is based on a system of acknowledging what you're doing, whether or not what you do is violent or not. Like if you kill even one character in the game, you cannot get the passive run, even just one. And I did that on accident my first playthrough, and I didn't realize, because I did the same thing I did in Nier Automata. I was killing things without thinking about it because I just didn't think about that stuff back then. And then the game, it wasn't until I got to the final boss that I realized that first enemy that I killed, the only enemy I killed, this final boss is holding that against me, and I have to play this as if it's a genocide run. And or at least just that final
like
boss.
Or at least like a neutral run. Genocide run would be, you know, you kill everything.
Right, but I'm saying in that in that one I do have to kill the final boss, which is not something I would want to do, but they held that one murder that I did against me. And I liked that, but also kind of hated it because I couldn't go back and change that.
Yeah, you have to play the whole game again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then
even
the
if
game
you
acknowledges
restart
that
the
if
game,
you do that.
Exactly.
Like
the game
if you
acknowledges
kill, like,
it if you
Toriel or
restarted
something,
your
and then you restart, Flowey's like, oh, you killed her, and then you undid it because you felt bad. How about that, you know?
Yup, exactly. So you'll never get the pure passive run. And I love that it did that. And like looking at Pokemon, they never like give okay. So back in the day, we were all little kids and we were just like making our Pokemon battle.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, like they're hurting each other. Cool. But nowadays, people started to have some issues with that because, you know, the internet discourse became a thing, and people are like, you know, maybe this isn't very good that we're making our Pokemon hit each other. They're like animals. It's the same as like people are comparing to dog fighting in real life, right? So Pokemon eventually gave an explanation for that by saying like, oh, actually Pokemon bond with you by fighting. And this was back in Gen 5 when they tried to say this, and honestly I was not buying it. And it wasn't until Pokemon Legends that they added even more lore to that to try to justify it, and that's when I kind of became okay with it. And that was showing how the bonding by battling together, it stems from a survivalist perspective. And, you know, you see in Legends, like, you're fighting for your life the whole time because your player character can actually die from the Pokemon.
Yeah, that was something
and
I
you have to
catch.
Yes, and you have to catch the Pokemon to survive fully and get through the game. So it shows, you know, that you have to work. Humans and Pokemon started working together because they needed each other to survive. Because the Pokemon you catch also will
I assume
will die on their own a lot of the time because they're part of the food chain. And on top of that, the Pokemon getting caught. Oh, okay. What are you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, like, before you move on to the next point with the like dying and being part of the food chain, because of like the cartoon violence, that's another thing that the games refuse to depict, but we also just have to imagine.
Yeah, they put it in Pokedex
down.
Entries and stuff, but never show it. Yeah. Well, they showed it in Pokemon Snap, kind of. In New Pokemon Snap, there's a scene where a Magikarp gets snatched by Pidgeot, but that's the closest we've seen to it. And the final thing I wanted to pinpoint with Pokemon specifically is like catching Pokemon. Back in the day where, you know, we did it, it was fine, and then people were like, actually, maybe it's not good that we're catching things against their will. So then Pokemon gave us some lore that Pokemon actually choose to get caught. It's not that you're forcing them into the balls. They want to be caught by you because they respect you and like you and want to live the rest of their lives with you, or at least a temporary temporary period of time with you. And in Legends, they kind of show again where that stemmed from. It was from a survivalist perspective. The Pokemon historically had to choose humans that they trusted to survive, and that's why they do it up until modern day. So they tried, but it was also like not worded in the games. It was implied, and they only gave statements outside of the games.
So it's kind of like, it's not humans, they're goblins you're running over into your car.
Yeah, that type of thing.
Yeah. where it's
They're
like,
just,
yeah,
they
let's
insist, hey, just
le-
trust us.
yeah, let's give an explanation here for why it's not the problematic thing that you think it is that can be applied into the real world.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
and
the whole thing is just about framing, though, because the actual action is not changing. It's just the way it's framed.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's just
exactly.
changing
We're still doing
how
the same
socially
thing.
acceptable it is.
exactly.
Like
and
running
that
over
comes
goblins
back
is
to what we
socially
talked about
acceptable,
earlier.
but not humans. For
Yep.
that first example
Yep.
there. Just
Yeah.
like you're surviving together with creatures that want to survive together with you is acceptable, whereas, capturing creatures from the wild to force into fights is not socially acceptable.
Yep.
By comparison.
Well, going into the whole balances of reward and consequences, Harmonia, you had some examples of rewards from violence. I don't remember them.
Yeah, there are definitely some games that will have rewards for violent acts. In some ways that maybe the developers might not even expect. Like, in one of my game design classes, one of the examples that was used was Grand Theft Auto. I think it was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I don't know if it was a specific one. Some Grand Theft Auto game. Where, apparently, one of the things that you can do if you're low on health is you can hire a hooker. And then she'll restore your health, and now your health is full, but, you had to pay that much money. So as she's leaving, you gun her down, take your money back, and now you just got a free heal. And that's, like, the most violent approach that you can take to that. And it nets you the highest reward. In maybe a way that the game developers might not have even expected, but that is, clearly promoting by having the biggest reward behind the most violent behavior. It's like, hey, if you do the most violent behavior here, you get the highest reward. So why wouldn't you do that? It's not real after all. So
It's also pretty misogynistic, which is probably why it was in the game at all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Again, I don't think they expected it to be like the best
it wasn't
way
intended.
to like
It's
grind for
Yeah.
that, but they still gave they programmed it in there for you to be able to get that back from
Yeah.
them like that.
You could say that that's kind of then an emergent violent reward in like play experience. You could kind of argue
Yes.
for.
Yeah.
And, players kind of came up with it.
Was there more examples like that you can think of?
There's ones where it's like there's also violence as a consequence. Like it was mentioned earlier, if you kill like an important NPC and then they're gone forever. There are games that were also brought up in my game design classes where I forget what exactly it was, but like some old PC adventure game where it's like you can kill a shopkeeper and then get that immediate reward there of, the stuff in the shop, but then you can't, get things from them ever again. And I think there was this one specific game where it turned out this one NPC was needed to progress the plot. And if you killed them, you've just basically soft-locked yourself.
Oh no.
So
That
the
makes
game
me think
punishes you
of-
for violence.
It makes me think of Dark Souls, because that's a game where there are rewards for killing people and punishment for killing people.
Yeah.
And the rewards for killing them aren't like necessarily messed up. Because some people, the whole thing with Dark Souls is that you don't really know who to trust.
Yeah.
Like some NPCs are good, some are bad. You cannot tell because they all just act evil universally across the board, damn near.
Yeah.
So you don't know who to trust or kill.
Like,
But
and that's a good
What?
example of Dark Souls 1 in terms of who you can trust, where there was like the Firekeeper at Firelink Shrine, and there's one
Exactly.
person there that's like evil. And if you go into it blind like I did and don't do anything about this one evil guy, he kills the Firekeeper, and then you have to go on like a whole quest line to, bring back Firelink Shrine's bonfire.
yeah, and that's like later on in the game. You didn't even you just straight up, that bonfire is gone for like the next however many hours.
Yeah, you have to go like kill that guy out in the world and retrieve the Firekeeper's soul that he
Yeah.
had.
So you get punished for not killing someone, which I think is interesting. For not like paying
Okay.
enough attention and figuring out that he was a bad guy.
Okay, you guys are gonna think I'm mad weird for this, but I am a vegetarian after all. But I don't think the violence is just specific to humans killing humans. There's a lot of desensitization to humans killing animals in video games that I've noticed personally since becoming vegetarian. I never thought about it before, but like you get rewarded for killing living creatures in a lot of games, like even like Zelda. Like think about Breath of the
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
You kill a
For, like,
fox.
hunting, yeah.
Yes, you kill a fox or a wolf or something. It didn't even pose that much of a threat, if one at all, to you. And you can kill them and just like you get meat that heals you from it. And meat
It's like
that
some
you
of the
can
best
cook.
healing items in terms of heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, especially if you cook them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of messed up. But I know that a lot of people don't
yeah.
think that way, and it's there's desensitization there for sure.
I guess realistically, it's how you would survive in the wild.
Yes.
My thing is, it's not as bad if you're gonna eat it. It's not like violence for the sake of violence or killing them for the sake of it. Like, you're gonna eat it, so it's not going to waste.
Yeah, there's that aspect. Like, when it comes to real life hunting, like, if people are hunting and, really striving to use everything they can from the animal, then, great. But those that are just hunting for, like, the sport of it, and, like, I remember my mom worked at, like, a deli in a grocery store in her younger years, and she was telling me once about, like, these two hunters that were, like, browsing the meats, and they were chatting about how, like, oh, they really want to go hunting again soon and, get some more meat and stuff. But if they do that, they have to throw out the stuff that's already in the freezer from, like, the last hunt. And that, just immensely pissing her off. And that's the kind of thing that would piss me off as well.
Obviously, like, real life is different. Like, when we were talking about, like, back in the day when we needed to hunt versus now where we don't need to, yada, yada, right? But in the video games, I have noticed a difference in the sense that, like, I'm going to compare Tomb Raider and Zelda here. In the Tomb Raider reboot, it's actually a really impactful scene. The first time you play a sequence where you had to kill a deer, and Lara, like, doesn't want to do it, and they kind of made it like a ceremony where she, acknowledges that she just took a life and is sad about it and says it out loud and kind of like does a ceremony in the sense that, like, she's honoring what she just killed.
Like a funeral type thing almost?
Yes, exactly. And comparing that to, again, Breath of the Wild, you just kind of go up, you swing your sword, and they automatically turn into a fucking, like, chicken. Yeah, you hit a fox and it turns into a T-bone steak or something. And, like, that's where I find the issues to arise. Like, they don't acknowledge that, like, hey, you're only doing this as survival, and that's, like, really the circumstance where it's okay. Like, Tomb Raider did that, like, they took the time to do that. And it's funny because Tomb Raider is the more realistic visually game, but Zelda is more cartoon comic mischief, yet doesn't have you, I don't know, like,
you don't
trying
care
to
about the animals you kill.
Yes, you don't care about them, and you're not trying to get to a point where you don't have to kill them anymore.
Because that kind of game doesn't want you thinking about it too much.
Yeah.
Like,
even though it's not they present it comically.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not the objective of the game to get you thinking about that. It's to go, like, explore the world and, go crucify some Koroks or something.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out the desensitization aspect that comes from that, which I find interesting because things like that can be hidden and tucked away. It's kind of like you were talking about with Kirby at the beginning of this. It can be hidden and tucked away there and be much darker than even a realistic game. Something that happens in a realistic game.
Circling back to Dark Souls, I swear I'm not going to talk about it too much. But in Dark Souls, I like the way that it handles, like, killing NPCs, because it's truly, like, I don't know how you would say it. Like, it's not necessarily inherently rewarded or punished. It, like, depends on the person, and you don't know any of it beforehand. It's like you could kill someone who's, like, actually a really good merchant that sells you some of the best stuff in the game, and, like, you can summon them, they'll help you on your quest, and you just kill them. It's like, well, why'd you do that? There's nothing in the game is going to be like, oh, you shouldn't have killed them. But deep down, you're going to know you screwed yourself out. You screwed yourself out of that for no good reason.
Yeah.
And even the way that it's depicted can be worth noting as well. Like, you kill an NPC in Dark Souls, and they'll be like, why did you do this? As they slowly die.
Yeah, like, you can tell that their hopes and dreams are dying too. It's kind of fucked.
Like, you actually killed them. As opposed to just, like, rocket launchering somebody in Grand Theft Auto and watching their ragdoll fly across the sky. It doesn't get you thinking as much about, like, oh, should I have done that?
Yeah, they don't poof and just leave all their armor behind.
Mm-hmm.
Although they do disappear, so I guess they kind of do that, actually.
Well, I was saying that, it gets you thinking more in something like Dark Souls. Where it's like you slowly watch them fade out, like, you've killed me. Good. I mean,
I was just saying
as opposed to the, goofy ragdoll across the screen,
Mm-hmm. Back to the Kirby vs. Battlefield.
Wait, are you recording?
What did your class actually say?
No, there was something else that I did want to talk about from earlier that I didn't get the chance
okay.
to. Looping back to the whole of what's too far, I wanted to just kind of get some general definitions, like what do we consider to be too far? Like not in the sense of like what does it depict, but like what is the definition of like too far? Does that mean that it's too violent? Is there a such thing as too violent? Like what do we mean here by too far?
Are you talking about how we feel about it, or how society
How it's socially
How about
feels
both?
about it?
I mean, in terms of like society, that would just be like what's socially acceptable and not, I would say.
Mhm.
I mean, there might be a disconnect between those two. Obviously, with society, it's like what's legal and what's not.
Yeah.
Like again, like a lot of games, the reason they're on the market is because they had to do things a specific way in order to be allowed to be on the market.
Mhm.
And we kind of went over examples of those already. But like for us personally, I guess I'll give my answer, but I'm kind of interested in hearing what Sate has to say about this first. What is
Please give
too
your
far
answer
for
first.
you? No, what is too far for
No,
you?
give your answer
Sate?
first. Give your answer first. What you're thinking.
Harmonia,
What?
what's too far for you?
I don't know if I quite have like a good answer myself. Like, I know that in terms of like societal stuff, a lot of it is, you know, what's socially acceptable, like what's, you know, obeying what's considered lawful and good acts as opposed to what's seen as, you know, not so great things or potentially harmful to our own society. But the way that I see it, it's really hard to put a definition on.
Mhm.
I do feel like there really isn't a connection between, you know, there's violence in a video game and it promotes someone to go do said violent thing in real life. So in that sense, you could say that there's no point of being too far. But I would say that too far is the kind of, in some ways, too far might be the point where it makes you go like, oh, is it okay that I'm doing this? But maybe that's just like the perfect amount, because then it gets you thinking and realizing that this isn't a great thing. And, you know, there's a whole debate to be had about that.
Yeah, so the way that I would probably define that is what's harmful for society.
Mhm.
Like, let's take, for example, let's say you have a game where you're at war, and I mean, okay, maybe that's a bad example because I'm just against war in general.
Mhm.
So I think any game having to do, for me personally, any game having to do with war is harmful to society and shouldn't exist. But let's say you have a game like Grand Theft Auto, and in Grand Theft Auto, you can torture someone. Let's say that like visually you could torture someone and like have realistic reactions as if it's real life. Like that would be going too far because that might spark a bloodlust in someone rather than satiate something that and it would be too close to real life in a sense that they would have that line blurred way too much and would be more likely to commit something like that in real life. And I think that would be an example of something being harmful to society. For me personally, also acknowledging certain things, like I think it is harmful to society to allow violence in video games to occur in any form without a proper explanation. And when I think about games that give an explanation for why you're being violent, like even something like Bayonetta, like you're killing angels, right? And most, you know, a lot of people would be like, what, doesn't that make you the bad guy? But angels are organisms in that universe that actively are trying to end the world and bring it into their vision of what the world should be. You know, like they're a force, and they killed Bayonetta's entire clan. So there's also like a revenge aspect to it. Like the reason she's being violent towards them is because she hates them and wants to kill them. And Nier Automata, of course, is another great example of it, where like there's scenes in there where you get later on in the game and they have, you know, the main antagonists are robots, and they do a lot of work to make parallels between robots and humans, and you might not feel that because visually they look so different, and the game would never get away with this if they were humans. So you get to these parts in the game where robots will start either, you know, killing themselves, or you kill them very gruesomely, and when they do so, they have like death screams. They scream like a real person would being tortured or maimed in real life, and they would never get away with that if it was a real person and not a robot in that scene. And so that could possibly be harmful towards society if that was a real person that kills himself on screen in a really violent way and has those realistic reactions as if they're doing it.
So that's your idea.
Versus it being a robot.
As if it was that, but a human.
Yeah, anything harmful to society to consume. Yes.
Okay, so I have my answer now.
I wonder if I should go right now because I have a decent bit that I can say here. Maybe we should have Sait say what he wants to say first, and then we'll backtrack. The short version of what I want to say is, when it comes to that, I agree on one major thing, I disagree on another major thing, but we can backtrack back to that. I want to hear what Sait has to say first.
All right, just don't forget your points. So, for me, what goes too far, this kind of ties back into the thing we were talking about with Breath of the Wild, the whole killing animals thing. You're killing animals for kind of a reason versus some other games where it's no reason. That's the core of it for me. Is like how much of an explanation and a reason is there for it? How much of it is just violence for the sake of violence?
Can I say one thing real quick about that?
Sure.
Because the first thing that I just thought to compare it to was Subnautica, and like Subnautica, you literally do have to kill things to survive. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, you have plenty of other options. You don't have to kill the animals. You know what I'm saying?
But it does make the game harder for yourself.
Not necessarily.
You kind of need anything you can get early on.
Yeah, but like if there's animals around that you can take out and get like more Healy items, that makes the game easier than it would be to actively ignore them and only use the other resources.
Nah, because no matter how you start the game, you always start with 3 hearts. You don't really need something that heals 8 hearts when you start out with 3. Like, I don't think it makes a difference.
Well, when you progress and get more hearts
by doing that.
Wow.
Sure, but then you start collecting all sorts of different vegetation that you can make the same kind of large amount of heart recipes with. And there's actually, funny enough, like the thing that gives you the most hearts is a plant. It's the truffles.
Yeah, hardy truffle.
Yep. So it's not like you need to be killing these animals in the game for it. It really is just, that's why I have a problem with it. It's because they just give you that option when it's not necessarily
as an example.
Well, even
just to say that.
Even if we go with the assumption that it makes like no difference in like how easy or hard the game is in terms of collecting Healy items, just using the example of a game where here is a more violent option that makes the game easier, or here's a harder option, but makes things to be more of like a pacifist kind of approach. Like one good example of that might be Triangle Strategy, which is a game that like barely anyone knows, I think, where
I know it.
Okay. Like you can get an ending that is like, here's like the least death possible, here's like making everyone happy and stuff like that, but it's really hard to attain. The final chapters in it are really difficult, where you have to split your party up, and it clearly says that this is the hardest route to do if you want to be, cause as little death and destruction and stuff as possible. The 3 standard routes are always, you're gonna screw like a group majorly over by doing this, so choose which one, and it's the much easier thing to do.
For me, it's really just an acknowledgement thing. Like, it could be a good lesson to learn, if whether you're young or old or whoever it is that's playing, if they go out of their way even just a little bit to acknowledge the difference between performing one action versus another.
Well, the whole thing for me was just to use Breath of the Wild as an example. I don't actually think it's necessary to kill animals in that, although it does help. But it's just, what's an example of something where it's like just needless violence? I think some people brought up there was a
Any shooter.
What happened, Harmonia?
Oh, I just said Death Race again, but I guess it's the main objective of the game, so I don't know if it counts.
But like, there are games where it's just, they're just killing things. They're just shredding through things for like no reason. It's not like for the aesthetic. It doesn't help the story in any kind of way. There's no real motivation for it. You're just kind of doing it. And it's like so visceral, so extra. Like that's kind of too far for me, because it's like, what are we doing here? What's the point?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's almost any shooter, like a realistic shooter. I don't like the idea and I don't think it should be glorified, and I don't think that, especially now with the advent of the internet and we can actually learn and understand from people from across the world, the idea of two different nations going to war with each other over things that don't even matter, like who owns a land,
Yeah.
is ridiculous to most of us, and most of us I think feel that way. But games are still being made that glorify that, and and Harmonia said it earlier, it's because those the corporations that fund those games make a lot of money with or without the games, but they also get more people to make more money when they make those games and recruit more people through desensitizing them that way.
Yeah, and there are definitely groups that do want to have these kinds of acts glorified. To kind of segue into what I was mentioning earlier, where I had like one big thing that I agreed with and one big thing that I disagreed with. The big thing that I disagreed with was the idea that by doing violent acts in like a video game, it's going to make people want to do these violent acts in real life. There have been a lot of studies into this field and seen that there's like pretty much no correlation there. And, you know, like something like 1976's Death Race, it wasn't getting people to go out in their cars and start running over pedestrians or anything like that. There were no cases of that, for example. Like, I think that there was like a big news story however many years ago where there was a shooter that, you know, claimed that he did what he did because it was in like Grand Theft Auto 3 or something like that. And I know that a lot of media has like cited that as like, this is definitive proof that, you know, there's a correlation here. But from all
the one example they've ever had.
Yeah, but
you know, bro probably only did that for that reason. So
yeah,
the media
might
would
well
have
have been
that.
to stir the pot. But
they also might have just made that up or whatever.
Yeah,
Keep going.
It could well have been. But yeah, I don't really think that there's much of a connection there. But the major thing that I do agree with is that some depictions of violence can be problematic. And not necessarily in the sense of like, oh, what you're doing is a violent thing. It's more so like the context of the violent thing, like Sait was saying, for a reason, and like how it's going to be portrayed. Like, for example, with war, glorifying it, where a lot of these shooter games will portray war as like, hey, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, and, you know, let's defeat them for these trivial reasons. And war is, you know, it's a super glorified thing here. Like, and that's what things like the U.S. military want it to be in media. Like, here's an example outside of video games where, you know, Independence Day is a really good example of, like, glorifying the U.S. military. Where, especially, like, the what was it, remake, reboot? Whatever the heck thing they made a few years ago.
I don't know.
Where apparently it was also, like, funded in part by the U.S. military. And, you know, for anyone that doesn't know the movie, like, that could be watching this here, you know, it's a movie where it's like aliens have come to invade and take over the planet and stuff, and it's up to the U.S. military to stop them. And, you know, it's super glorified being like a member of the military and stuff like that. And
yeah,
I believe there was a video essay that I saw on like the more recent Independence Day movie that really delved into like the U.S. military's connections to that film, and how there were literally trailers of the film that would redirect to like the U.S. military page and, you know, talk about how it's like, you can be just like in the movie and be like a brave hero like you see on the big screen. And, you know, it's just kind of propaganda for glorifying and trying to make this a desirable position, you know. So I do think that can be a problematic thing there, where something might not by default be socially acceptable, but this is my last sentence here.
You cannot say anything, say.
This is my last sentence. There might be situations like that where maybe something isn't quite socially acceptable or is teetering on socially acceptable, but then is pushed to become socially acceptable because of, you know, a, gosh dang it, what's the word? Ulterior motive for some group.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, anything can become normal if we live with it long enough, no matter how bad it is.
And if it's
what were you going to say,
ways, yeah.
So, going off of what you were saying, Johnny, about games always glorifying shooting and war, and even what you were saying, Harmonia, there's a debate, this kind of has nothing to do with games, there's a debate about what makes an anti-war movie a true anti-war movie, because a lot of people will say to the idea that, oh, it's not glorifying it, they're showing you how terrible it is, they're showing you it's an anti-war game or whatever.
Yep.
But there's a debate about what actually makes an anti-war movie or game, and a lot of people think All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't know if either of you guys have seen it.
Long time ago, I wouldn't remember at this point.
people would say that that's more of an anti-war movie because it doesn't glorify it like at all. You could argue that it's showing war is still a problem, but it actually kind of goes out of a way to just show the reality of it. Like there's no happy ending at the end. The main characters are all dead. They all lost all their friends. People just died out of nowhere horribly. So it's like, in that case, that is an actual depiction of war that I think could be somewhat good because it's showing you the reality of it.
Homework for anyone watching. A good example of an anti-war movie is Grave of the Fireflies. I would recommend watching that if you want to see an anti-war movie.
I haven't seen that before. Maybe I'll have to check it out here.
It's a Japanese anime movie, and it's a classic, but it's really sad. So if you want to see like someone affected by war that has nothing to do with the war, which is mostly what happens during wars, people not having nothing to do with the war but getting affected by it, that is a great film to watch. Like that is a true anti-war movie. You see the actual faces that suffer from war. And sure, obviously the people involved in the, shootouts, definitely some of them, but I mean, a lot of them were, I wouldn't have signed up for them personally. I guess a lot of them got forced into it, but still.
Yeah, you get drafted in wars.
Yeah. But like the civilians suffer the most, and that's where you get the most casualties. Mm-hmm. So it's a good point there.
There are also some games that, will depict war clearly with the intention of not glorifying it or, to make arguments against it. Like, one example that's been used in my game design classes was this one Flash game that I believe was called Kabul Kaboom, where, it was literally just a browser Flash game. And the objective is to control a person on the bottom of the screen that is trying to, catch and eat the burgers falling from the sky while avoiding the bombs. And that's what the whole game was. You just keep on going, collecting as many burgers as you can until eventually a bomb gets you and you die. And this was a game that was released during a time that the US military was airdropping food supplies from the same aircraft that they were dropping bombs from. So it's like, what kind of arguments is this game making? So there are clearly some games that could exist to deliver a very counter message. Or I feel like another good example of games that have a very strong anti-war message would be the Metal Gear titles that I've only just started.
I was just about to say that.
I've only just been getting into for the past couple of years here. It's still a series that I'm relatively new to. But, they start out in the typical kind of way of the US here is gonna be all glorified and stuff like that. Here's the bad guys with the nukes. Stop them. But as you keep on playing, you start to realize the good guys don't really have your best intentions in mind either, and they're kind of bad guys as well.
They're kind of almost worse than the actual bad guys.
Yeah. That's Metal Gear, right? That you're talking about?
Yeah, Metal Gear. Yeah,
Metal Gear. So they finally are bringing the trilogy to Switch, so I'm finally gonna get to play it.
Yes.
Oh, it's already on Switch. That's how I played MGS2.
Yeah, so I'm gonna play it, and I've heard such great things, and I know for a fact that it is an anti-war video game series, which I was
really just about to say though that it's true that it is an anti-war series in all of its themes, but at the same time, they make you feel and look cool as hell doing the things that you're doing in those games.
That is fair. I mean, even in Smash Bros, Snake is out there
the cardboard box is pretty
badass.
Cool.
Yeah.
They make it look really awesome at the same time. So
yeah,
it's not 100% anti-war. I don't feel like.
I mean, they kind of glorify you getting in there and stopping bad guys and being a badass, but don't glorify following your superiors to a T and making the argument that the head honchos are always gonna be corrupt in some way or another.
I almost wonder though if that's their way of just trying to reel someone in who would be thinking that war is cool, only to subvert their expectation later on as they progress.
Yeah. I mean, Metal Gear does doing that, subverting expectations. Slight spoiler,
I find that to be more effective.
Slight spoiler for Metal Gear Solid 2. But
wait a minute.
Maybe you shouldn't even tell him this. Maybe you should just, because it's quite a spoiler.
Okay, don't tell me then.
What, do you know what I'm gonna say?
Don't tell me.
I think I do.
Well,
don't tell me then.
All right, I'll say it without actual spoilers. If you watch the trailers for the game, it makes you think that there's gonna be this one very key part about it that has remained consistent throughout the series. But then when you actually play the game, like it makes you think that at the beginning for like the first few hours. Then all of a sudden, it's just like, nope, this isn't that kind of game. It's something else here. Have fun. This is what the game is now. And every trailer did not have like any implications of that. And would do like,
I love that.
And would use like shots and cutscenes that specifically didn't spoil the one thing that ends up being a surprise like 3 hours in. And I guess it's probably common knowledge for a lot of people at this point. It was a surprise for me, and I'll let it be a surprise for you here.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? This is what's happening? So
I like that because the only other game I can think of that did that was Nier Automata that I've played. So I want to see something that did it back in the like even before that.
That was like 2001, I think.
Yeah, it's old.
There's a movie example that I can cite that did that. Deadpool 2. Every single trailer for that movie implied that it was gonna be like, we're assembling a team, and it's gonna be like a whole team superhero movie. And in the movie, they start doing that, like, oh, there's a big threat, we need to assemble a team, and they assemble this team, and they're jumping out of the plane, and it's like, oh, it's what the movie is gonna become now, like was advertised in the trailer. And then like everyone on the team dies except for one. Like just a big middle finger to the audience, like, nope, this movie's not what you thought it was gonna be. And I love that so much.
And Attack on Titan's also kind of like that. They subvert several times throughout that show.
Oh, don't spoil me. I just started watching it.
Oh, you're in for a ride.
I didn't spoil it. Yeah, it's one of those shows that like it keeps like making you think that it's gonna be going a certain way, and then it just completely changes it.
I get that impression because it starts off very generic. It seems like almost.
Yeah,
it's not gonna stay like this. Surely.
Yeah, it's not generic.
and Attack on Titan like is also another good example of something that seemingly at the beginning like glorifies military and war, but then at the end it's like, this is really messed up, and it makes some serious arguments about like humanity and our nature for war and like the inevitability of it.
Yeah, although I don't agree with that sentiment, at least not in the modern day. I think it's true back when people didn't have the internet to learn and understand people from across the world. But like now people aren't falling for that. They're not falling for it. Like
it depends where you live.
Your own experiences and propaganda.
Yes, and there's still, again, you're right, Harmonia. There are holdover areas, but it's only those are only getting smaller and smaller.
Hopefully, it keeps on going that way.
It seems to be the trend. Like our generation is completely different from the last two, and there's good reason for that.
Yeah, and
our trends are entirely the opposite of the last two generations.
Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of people that will always say, like, things are so violent all the time, everything sucks, but when you consider that before World War I, there was a war between major powers like every 30-some years, this is the most peaceful time in human history, which is really weird to think about considering there is still so much violence going on all the time, but yeah.
Yeah. And they still do their best to hide that, for sure. Yeah. But it's much harder. Like, look what's going on. I'm not going to say exact things, but like, somewhere else in the world right now, there's something going on.
Yeah, a couple places.
And there's some propaganda coming out, but people are like, wait a minute, that's not accurate. And people are, proofreading and showing the truth in counter to the propaganda, which I really am enjoying seeing people band together to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely not like a time where what's published is the ultimate truth,
Yeah.
Exactly. And even right here in our own soil, like, I'm assuming we're all here in America, right? But
no, I'm Canadian.
I actually live in Japan right now.
Never mind. Okay, so
no, I do. I'm used to
it. All right. So
y'all are the only Americans here.
For me, being here in America, it's never been easier to see what happens in Congress than it is now. Like before, you had to have exclusive access in order to see transcripts or see footage, whatever it is. But now you can go on YouTube, you can see entire hearings on the House or the Senate floor and know exactly what's going on. You can see who's dumb, who's actually trying to work for us.
You can see who's dumb.
You can see who's getting into fights over like schoolyard bully type situations. It's bad. I didn't realize until now. I mean, I always knew that like they were trying to screw us over, but I didn't realize until now just how incompetent they all are. Exactly. So we need to vote them out and vote some new people in, and I wouldn't have known that before. Anyways, I kind of strayed from video games.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
very
was about to
much.
say, like, wait, how do we end up getting to this? How do we loop it back now?
We were
because
talking about
video
anti-war stuff.
video games like Metal Gear Solid try to
Oh,
show
yeah.
us those things, and like Metal Gear tried to show us back in the day when, you know,
Well, it wasn't the
it's like I
standard
said,
thing
we
to do so.
exactly, and like now we're seeing more works come out like that,
Yeah.
and they're becoming increasingly more common and more effective. And think about how many like so many post-apocalyptic settings are now the norm, and it's because, and usually the reason for the post-apocalyptic setting is because humanity
Sucks.
like fell for propaganda and like destroyed itself.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's how it would happen in real life. Like we all fall for propaganda and then destroy ourselves. But we're not doing that, luckily, I don't think. But it might be too late. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, time will tell here. One thing that I do want to talk about a little bit on this subject in terms of like games making anti-war arguments is also games that don't draw a direct parallel to our real world, like with, you know, exact one-to-one comparisons, but will still abstract that. Like a really good example of that would be Papers, Please, where, you know, it's...
What? Who?
Do you not know Papers, Please?
You haven't heard of Papers, Please?
No.
Oh, you gotta play Papers, Please.
It's a really good game.
It's a short game. You can beat it in one session. It's an indie game.
Say please.
So,
say please play Papers, Please.
So, you have to please. Can you play Papers, Please?
I'll think about it.
I will gift it to you on Steam if you want to play
You should
it.
at least look into it. It's really
explain here and then gift it to me later. Let's go. Okay, go.
So, Papers, Please is a game that takes place in, what, like the 1970s, something like that? You are a border agent. Like, you won a job lottery. You're the only member in your family that, you know, has a job that you literally just got lucky getting from a lottery. And you work, like, stamping passports at this border control for the fictional country of Arstotzka. Glory to Arstotzka! And you need to choose, like, whether to let people in or whether to, you know, deny them access. And as the game goes on, the rules and regulations become, like, more and more strict. Like, you're not allowed to let in people from this country. Or, you know, people from this country need, like, an extra permit. And just, like, this very, very controlling regime here. And there are some decisions that make you really, really test your morality. Like, there's the beginning of one day where one of the guards at the border there, he comes up to you and is like, oh, my girlfriend will be coming through here today. Like, can you please let her through? Like, she's the only thing that I have left, and I'm the only thing that she has left. Like, you know, so if you could please just be kind to her, like, that would be great. And, you know, give her this little heart locket or something or other. And then she comes to the, you know, to show her passport and stuff, and you find that it's expired or there's something wrong with it. And you know that the thing to do to, you know, make the most money with your job and not get a citation from your boss is to deny her entry. Or you can, you know, disobey the system and you can let her through. And then, you know, you get a citation, you get like your pay docked and stuff like that. And there are lots of situations like this that make you question, do you do what's best for your family? Or do you do what's best for other people here? What kind of decisions do you make? And, you know, as you're going on, you have to manage all your expenses as, like, you know, your family's getting cold, some family members are hungry, you've got, like, a kid that's fallen sick and stuff like that. And, you know, you're just struggling to get by in this awful regime yourself. So while it doesn't name any real-world countries, it kind of makes arguments about, you know, some of these communist regimes in throughout history here. And, you know, what life there might have been like under, you know, just that kind of dictatorship or something like that, and that kind of system, and how, you know, everything is just kind of a struggle to get through. And the game has like 16 or something different endings. You can decide if you want to try and save up and get like fake passports and smuggle your family out. You can try to ally with this one group to try and overthrow the government. You can just be the best border patrol agent that you can be, you know, deny everyone that shouldn't get in and allow only, you know, true Arstotskins through, or whatever. And it's a journey, that game.
Sounds like, my goodness.
So, you know, that's a game that doesn't have, you know, any real world exact parallels. Like, it's not, you know, using actual real world names and events. But when you play it, it's like, okay, I see where I could envision this taking place in the real world in, like, the historical context, you know?
Yeah.
And so it still makes arguments about it.
Sounds
You gotta
interesting.
play that game, Johnny. I
Y'all
can't believe I've never
gotta-
heard of it.
Yeah, show me later. Possibly gift it to me. We'll see. Yeah.
Say, did you just post in the group DM glory to VGLS?
Yeah, I made that a while back.
As a parody off of that. Oh man. But yeah, so that's an example of a game that, you know, will abstract history and make arguments about, you know, real life issues and violence and stuff like that. And there are acts of violence in it. Like, you know, if there's someone that seems like they're climbing over the wall, do you use your key to open this safe, pull out a rifle, and shoot the guy that just climbed over the wall? Like, as your job dictates that you do.
I appreciate that you tried to save that, but I feel like we're getting a little far off topic about violence.
I mean, that's the. I would just say
these are forms of violence.
Yeah, I would say
it's an attempt to harm groups of people.
Yeah, I would say that that's a form of portraying violence in a game, not to glorify it, but to clearly show that, you know, it's a moral dilemma here in this kind of case, where it's like, what do you do? And it makes you think about vielse, you know?
Yeah.
Okay,
And it's also just,
I
like I said,
retract
it's
my
a
statement.
different
I
kind
retract
of
my
a-
statement. You saved it.
Yeah. just different way to do it.
And, I mean, there are also other games that take place in, you know, fictional fantasy worlds that'll make arguments through their violence as well. Like, I haven't played these games to know myself, but I've heard that in games like Mass Effect, you can decide what to do with, like, entire alien species and stuff like that.
Wow, really?
Apparently
I
so,
never
from
played
what
it.
I've heard
I
in
don't
my
know.
lectures.
Yeah, apparently you can cause a genocide in that
Yeah.
game. So
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
That makes the game sound more interesting, though. Honestly, I never had it on my radar. Maybe I should change that.
yeah, apparently there's some situations like, I'll play it one day and then be able to talk about these examples, like, a bit better. But apparently there's situations like that. But because I haven't played it, I can't say if it, you know, glorifies it, portrays it as right, if it portrays it as, you know, more thought-provoking and like, maybe I shouldn't be doing that, even though my superiors are telling me to do that, or whatever, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we should start wrapping this up. Maybe, like, talk about Kirby versus Battlefield, what we think about that now.
yeah, because you never told us what conclusion y'all came to.
Yeah, the class.
Oh, for
right?
the class discussion?
Uh-huh.
At the very end of the class, after much deliberation amongst, like, our multiple groups, the class came to the decision that Battlefield is more violent in terms of blood and gore, but Kirby's more violent in terms of what you do. And I feel like during the discussions that we've had here, we've kind of unpacked those a little bit. Like, what's the potential problematic nature of one or another? Like, what ways should you portray these? And, you know, what ways is violence abstracted? And what issues may or may not arise with it? What benefits might arise from it? In maybe a situation like Papers, Please, where it gets people to think in ways that they hadn't thought before. Or Undertale is another example there, you know?
So, I mean, I still think it's Battlefield is the more violent of the two because you're, like, making the fictional characters suffer, and that by comparison to Kirby, and it kind of goes towards all the things we talked about before on, like, the realism aspect and how the characters are affected by violence. So I still side with Battlefield being the more violent one.
I mean, you don't know what's happening in Kirby's stomach. It could just be being
I
slowly
do.
digested. You do?
I do actually,
Wait,
because
have they made an
in
official statement?
in the Nintendo DS game Kirby Squeak Squad, when you swallow more than the power that you absorb to use, they go into little bubbles on the touch screen. So that's where they are in Kirby's belly. They're on the touch screen of the Nintendo
The
DS.
touch screen, you just can't see the touch
in
screen.
a bubble waiting to be re-released.
Yeah.
For me, I think originally I started this saying that Kirby was more violent, but I come around. I think Battlefield is the answer.
I think you said Battlefield at the beginning.
Did
too.
I say Battlefield? Okay, well then I haven't learned anything. I'm the
So
same
we're
person.
all on the same damn page. Okay, good. Well, except for you, Harmonia, apparently.
Yeah, what do
I
you
mean-
think?
I mean,
I mean, Kirby's stomach is clearly worse than.
I mean, the
feel,
way I always thought of it, they're like in a black hole. That sounds like That sounds terrible.
I mean, I feel like during this discussion we've unpacked like different forms of violence. And if we're just gonna use like the basic definition of violence, like we discussed at the beginning, like the dictionary definition where it's like causing harm to one another, that's Kirby without a doubt.
Yeah,
causing
it's definitely
genocide
Kirby.
and stuff like that. But there's a lot more thought that has to go into violent acts that are more applicable to the real world in a case like Battlefield.
Like, I guess I would say Kirby is more violent, but Battlefield is more meaningfully violent, if that makes any sense.
I don't know. Are you really killing more people in Kirby than you are in Battlefield? I think it's probably about on par.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
No, but it's probably not on par.
yeah.
No
Definitely
way.
for sure.
No doubt in my
Like,
mind.
destroying planets.
When does Kirby destroy a planet? Besides that one, that he punches and it cracks in half.
Besides that one.
But no one said there was anyone on that planet.
There was life on it for sure.
How many planets are there that have no life on them? Most of them.
Okay, but
So-
this is Kirby though.
There's always life on the planets that Kirby visits. Yeah, but
We'll have to. Time will tell on that one.
maybe Kirby will just start working at an Arstutzkin checkpoint.
Oh my god.
See, he doesn't even get that because he didn't play the game or watch it.
Y'all.
Well,
all
now,
right.
now he knows about Glory to Arstutska, though.
All right.
So,
Well, that's episode 4. Thanks for coming on, Johnny.
thank
you should make sure to thank me twice because I'm technically half a host.
Wait, what?
I mean,
Oh, yes, that's how
Um,
that works.
okay,
well,
yeah.
it's Harmonic-Jams. You're the harmonic, I'm the jams.
Yeah, but does that mean that both of us get thanked twice if we're both half hosts then, or how does that work?
No, I actually get thanked more. He thanked you once. Now for my thanks.
All right, I see how it is. We're gonna have to break
No.
out into some violence. It's looking like.
I think that's the only solution.
Yeah. All right. Well, once again, appreciate having you on here, Johnny, for this topic here. May have
Thank
you
you,
on for
thank
some
you for having
future
me.
topics here if you're interested.
Oh yeah. I got a lot to say.
It was really good. It was nice to
Yeah.
meet you too. This is the first time we've ever talked.
yeah, back
Yeah,
at
there
you.
was
This was
that.
fun. I'm very happy to be graced by the presence of intellectuals. Thank you very much.
I hope everyone tuning in enjoyed this episode here, and let us know your thoughts in the comments down below for several of these questions. Like, what do you count as violent in a game? What do you consider to be too far, if anything? And if nothing, then why not? Which game do you think is more violent, Kirby or Battlefield? What are other questions here? I don't remember.
Oh, there were a lot. hopefully,
what-
hopefully people have been editing their
Like,
comments as they went through this.
What do you
Yeah,
consider
what's-
socially acceptable and not?
Yeah, what's worse, a grenade or a nuke?
Yeah,
That's not the
that
question, but just roll with it.
Maybe like what's the worst depiction, or maybe not worse, but what's the more violent depiction? A
Yeah,
lot of
it's the
people
more
dying
violent.
kind of off camera, or a lot of people gruesomely dying on camera. All these various questions that you can answer. Let's make the comments like really violent. Everyone fight with each other for no reason.
What?
Tag me in the comments so I can argue with you.
Tag Johnny and all of them. But
Johto Jonny, tag me. I'm come for you. I'm coming.
yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah,
Next
and
time.
and Johnny, I believe, is the first other YouTuber that we've had
Oh.
here on the podcast before. So you'll be able to find his channel in the description below and stuff, where you can go
Yeah,
be mad
really?
at him and his comments instead.
Now wait a minute. I didn't know one said to do all that. No one said to come for me. I'm coming for you.
You'll come for them before they even comment. Anyway, yeah. Hope everyone was able to enjoy this. Let us know your thoughts, and yeah, until next time here.
Bye.
Peace out, y'all.
See you.